Hello, everybody. Elizabeth Johnston here, your story and creativity coach. And I'm super excited today to be talking to Lisa. And we met a couple of years, well, like 4 years ago, 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
like that,
Yeah,
at a
yeah,
conference here in
yeah.
Montreal. And it turns out that we're both, from Concordia, and we just, clicked, and we've stayed into contact ever since. And I just love what you do, Lisa. And I have here that you're a public scholar, which congratulations, like that's super awesome.
I wasn't public, like I was in the first cohort. I guess we don't
Mm,
lose the title. It
yeah,
was like the first cohort in, I think it was, I don't remember if it was 2018 or 2000. Yeah, it was the
yeah.
first. Yeah, it was a very, very nice thing. Yeah.
And so what did you know, what did it mean to be a public scholar? Like how did you get it, and what did you do after you got that designation?
Um, Actually, it's funny that we should be like on Facebook. Like the public scholar, the idea of the public scholar, at least the way I understood it, was the encouragement uh, of taking research out into the real world, quote unquote, right? Like the idea of participating with our research outside of the academic, sort of very narrow academic sphere. Usually, when you write an article, like if somebody reads it, that's good, right?
Yeah,
Like when you go to school, you pay your professors to read your paper. After you're done, who reads it, right? Like,
yeah, yeah.
so people want to be cited and so on for, and that makes sense, when you write something and that becomes relevant for other scholars to make knowledge with, and that's good. But I mean, you want to also make sure, and there's a push for that. Like there's this thing called the 3-minute thesis, for example, right, where people are asked to sort of gather their research in 3-minute stories and
Wow.
share them with the world, right? So that people,
Mm.
I mean, it's like a TED talk on steroids, right? Like
Wow, yeah.
right? And so the idea of which makes sense often, like if let's say you're a scholar and you get, let's say, public funding, for example, shouldn't your what you do go back to I mean, for me, that made a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
um, that if you get funded, then you should be able to share with everyone. um, the reason why I applied for it was because I was feeling very like shy about putting things out there. I play a lot, like I'm with performance. That's not difficult. Like I like talking like this. This is fun. But writing something down and putting it out there in the world where anybody could just do anything, whatever
Yeah.
it makes me very, very uncomfortable. And so I was thinking that I would, yeah, get more ease with
Mhm.
that. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
yeah. I learned a lot. I can't say that I've like published a whole bunch of stories. I'm still more comfortable this way than. But I mean, you don't have to write all the time, and that it's a process. I found that it's a process. That's good.
And it's sort of like a writer in residence, that
Yes.
they are producing works
Yeah.
and being hosted by wherever they're won the residence.
Yeah.
But then they're required to have some public interactions, and
Yes.
either read from their work in
Yes.
progress or that kind of
Yes.
stuff. And
Yes.
so that's kind of similar to what the function of the public
Yes.
scholar is.
Yes. To
Very
me,
cool.
it was not very like the public piece is like I come from community. And so the idea of being connected with the outside, like for me, academia is more the piece where it's not, that is not so, terribly, where I don't feel like, ooh, I've got this.
Mm.
But the being in community is more normal. So that is, yeah, yeah, that's where I
Yeah,
come from.
and
Yeah.
I think that when at the university, when there's these like interdepartmental and interdisciplinary opportunities to meet each other and hear about what people are doing in other faculties. It's so fascinating.
It's
Um,
fascinating.
and it provides this opportunity for possible cross fertilization, and but we really have to go out of our way to like set those things up. And but I think that what comes out of them is so valuable.
It's really fun. It makes me think of what my husband does. My husband created this thing called Explore Concordia, right?
Mhm.
And he has actually probably listened to the most stories, research stories of anyone in the university, because he listens to all of them, right? And he makes connections with the different. And that was his whole idea. It was this idea of why are we in silos, sort of each doing our own thing, when many people get at different things through different ways, right? So yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So
Mhm.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you use story in a really interesting way in your practice. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So story, I use story a lot. I've been so my research was on creative approaches to life stories, right? So I come from the Rwandan community. I'm a Rwandan Canadian, and so my whole adult life thinking has been around the stories of colonialism, conversion, sort of Christianity. There's been war, exile, genocide, and the stories of my family and my community. Right, like so, I've been working with and working through the how can I say the traces of violence, the traces that violence, like political violence, leaves in the lives of individuals, of families, of communities, right? So that's what I've been working with, and I was very uh, excited. Not excited is not the right word in relation to that kind of a subject matter, but I was really very privileged because I was working in the Montreal Life Stories project, which was a very long, sort of 7-year project where there were a number of communities, right? Like where there were many stories from all over the world. So it wasn't a project where we were each working on our stories, but also working in community with other people's stories, other
Mm.
stories of these kinds of stories. And so it's been a very rich. So I spent 7 years in the project, and then another 7 years writing about it, and
Wow.
then yeah, and now I'm doing a postdoc at the University of Toronto, and where I'm working with pre-colonial stories from Rwanda. So the
Mm.
stories um, of the Rwanda was a kingdom before colonization. So kingdom, I'm not sure that it's the right mm, language, because when you start kingdom, then you start with democracy to Salah. But it's like another unit before
Mm.
colonization, and there it was an oral tradition. And so the stories, the origin stories, and the stories of who we were and what we did, and the people who uh, were kept and they were transmitted from generation to generation in particular sort of clans, right? Particular families had particular pieces of the stories, and these stories, when independence happened and the were written down, so transcribed in conditions that are not clear, and then they were put away, and they've been in the Colonial Museum in Tervuren and at the U.S. Library of Congress. And so the idea is to wake the stories. So what would it
Mm.
mean to listen to these stories again, to take them into body, to speak them, to play with them, to invite artists to work with these stories again, right? Like these wisdom traditions that we have around us have it impact us all the time, right? Like if I think about the Greek antiquity, I'm a psychotherapist by training. The Everyone knows about Oedipus. Oedipus is a personage, right? All of the complexes come from that tradition.
Yeah.
When we think about Little Red Riding Hood, how many uh, uh, stories have been written from that archetypal kind of,
Mhm.
story, and they are all over the culture, right? And
Yeah.
so what kind of stories can we, what comes up then when we work with our stories as a I don't know, is it like leaven? Is that what it's called,
Yeah.
leaven in
Yeast.
English?
Yeast.
Yeast, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
um that's what yeah, so that's what I'm excited about right now. So I work with stories in terms of in my research, in my creative work. Obviously I work with I work a lot with different forms of community theater, improvisational theater, where the idea is to play back stories. And so interpreting or reinterpreting stories that are heard and witnessed by a community that creates community, right? It creates an us. It
Mm-hmm.
breaks isolation. It allows us to, if there are a lot of ruptures in a community, it allows us to experience something together,
Mm-hmm.
right? To make like a common experience. It
Mm-hmm.
allows us to also get um, uh, different different interpretations of the same story, right? Like there's a danger in a single story, and sometimes we get stuck in stories. And
Yes.
so it makes the invisible visible. Sometimes we live with stories that nobody talks about. And then if you put them out there, what then happens? It gives us leverage, right?
Yes.
So that's one way of working with stories in community. I work with individuals and the stories when I do clinical work as a psychotherapist or as a coach. I'm really interested in the stories that serve us versus the stories that keep us stuck,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And so, yeah, stories are amazing. Like when you have story, as soon as you have story, you enter the symbolic world, and that is possibility. Yeah.
Wow. That's beautiful. You mentioned that you wanted to wake up those stories that have
Mm.
been in the museums. Why is that important to wake up those stories? I mean, in terms of cultural identity and pre-colonial identity, why is that important to wake up those stories?
Well, I think that one of the things that it colonization. There's okay. It's fine. I haven't articulate, like there are a lot of things that I don't say because it's so easy to sort of like somebody could so okay, I'll try it. To me, what is the most uh, vexing about colonization is when the gaze that defines or tries to define who I am is not my own. So that doesn't make sense when you think about it. It's never your own gaze that defines you. But what I mean is that it's always that one is othered by as a starting point,
Right, by
right?
default.
And by default, and it's rarely an othering that is in favor, right? It's not like, oh yay, no, that's not how it works. And so the internalizing of this othering, but you have no idea. Like that bothers me when I feel like we don't know or we don't recognize. It's very difficult to recognize your own worth or your own worthiness. What is that what comes from you is worthy, right? So these stories are old. Like people are cut from these stories. It's not like uh, it's not like people forgot them. They were actively cut off of the way that they were thinking, right?
Right.
What they were the way people thought about themselves, for example. If you had been back in the day, you would say, I am Elizabeth, daughter of so and so, daughter of so and so, or daughter of so and so. Probably, if you had been in a patriarchal sort of, you would have said son of so and so, son of
Right.
so and so, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it has its plus, it has its, there are some things where we could question, but the idea of I am so and so in a fabric, in a social fabric, this is where I'm situated, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is how I understand my place in the world. This
Mm-hmm.
is how I understand the world around
Mm-hmm.
me. Sorry. It doesn't matter whether you you agree or I agree with the way in which I understand my way, but this is my way to think of myself in the world,
Right.
right?
Right.
This is my story, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when colonization and Christianization mean that the way you understand your story is no good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you another one. In that story, you are never going to be on top. You're never
Right.
going to win. You can't win, right?
Mm-hmm.
The house always wins. It's like,
Right.
why would you do that though?
Yeah.
Right? Why would you like, and it's a, when I can be flippant today because it's not like when I say, why did you choose it? Back in the day, you didn't choose it.
Mm-hmm.
It was enforced, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like there were, my grandfather was killed, like he was shot, right? It's not like something where you go, no, it's something that is violently enforced. But
Yeah.
then some generations afterwards, once it's internalized, it doesn't need to be enforced anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
when it's no longer enforced, then can we question that? Can we say, well, what if? What if we said, no, no,
Yeah.
I'm not
And
playing anymore?
so you help people who've internalized that messaging or that identity to bring those stories out so that you have the leverage to manipulate them or replace them with a story that serves you. Have I got
Well,
that?
in a way, my what I'm saying is, what if? What if our stories had value? What if? And the way, and I'm working as if they did, because
Mm-hmm.
I believe they do.
Mm-hmm.
I believe our stories hold value. So if we do that, then what? What then can be different? What
Mm.
then can,
Awesome. It really opens up this huge field of possibilities.
this?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a practice of possibility.
Practice of possibilities. I love that. Um, I've been watching a lot of CBC documentaries, about the Indigenous in Canada, and there's a documentary series about forward history, and there's two people in it. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's two people in it, two hosts, and one is an Indigenous woman who's an activist and actively helping her people reclaim their story and their power, and the other host is also an Indigenous man, but he didn't know that he was until he was in his 40s because his mother
Mm,
was in the residential schools, and when she came out, she never told anybody, and she could pass for white. And so his whole identity, he's in the so they're traveling all across Canada, meeting all different Indigenous communities, and he's trying to learn the language. She already knows the language, and so it's this really fascinating look at how do you reclaim your identity, and how do you keep hold of it in a society that is almost like you're standing on shifting sands, that it's hard to keep hold of it in the force of the house that holds all the cards, that sort of thing.
mm.
Yeah. And
Well, I think like what I love about these initiatives is that, what if the house is not the house? It's a house, right? There were other houses, there will be other houses. And what if, and once we keep it open, we keep it more fluid for ourselves, but also for everyone, right? Like, then the possibilities are for everyone, because I
mhm,
think that the sort of the narrowing, the either or is uncomfortable for a lot of people. I think that
mhm,
I think that a lot of people have more complex identities than just, you know, colonizer colonized. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's more complicated than that. It's more complex, and then
Mm-hmm.
what can we then, what becomes possible then, right?
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing is about possibility, right? Like what, because I don't think that I'm very, so I come from a community where there was genocide. So whenever there's an either or, I'm like, what does that what is the third thing that gets served by an either or, right? Like what gets served if people are so polarized that they that something else is no longer visible,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm very, very, in the name of what are we being polarizing?
Mm-hmm.
Like what is it, is that serving us? I'm very, very méfiant, suspicious of
Right. Yeah.
when we get stuck in yeah.
Yeah. And if, you know, if everybody was able to exist in that story of possibility, or possibilities, what kind of world do you think that that would result in?
It's so funny. I was thinking like, you know, like the other day I was thinking about like margins and centered, right? And
Mm,
you know, what would happen if we centered the margins? And then I was like, what, we're gonna find ourselves with a reverse like egg, you know, those fried eggs with the
yes.
sunny side? Like
Yeah.
what? We're gonna what? That can we not like go beyond this? And then I
Yeah.
was thinking, but isn't the world round? Like it's not like we have to imagine something. We just have to get out of our own way.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Like we already come in all kinds of different packages, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's not like this is new, right? It's not like we have to, ooh, let's invent something.
Yeah.
No, not really. Like we're there. We're already there, right?
Mm,
So so I was thinking, yeah, I was laughing. Yeah. The other day I was laughing at myself, sort of like, yes, and then we should think about a new, like, not really, actually, no, no. We should just let ourselves be, right? Like,
mm,
do we go after the squirrel? Not really. Like it just is. You know
mm,
what I mean? Like
yeah.
we don't. But then okay, so when you do watch National Geographic, I have an 8 year old, so I mean not that not that National Geographic is for 8 year olds, but when I through the yeah it you know those very yeah anyways I'm gonna and when you do see nature, it's not nature is not a sort of a place of, right? You also have things that eat other
Mm-hmm.
things. But
Mm-hmm.
there again, it's also the way we narrate, the way we story what we see, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can look at other pieces. We can look at other pieces that could be interesting. I think
Mm-hmm.
like we have so much to do, right? We don't like yeah um, yeah. Anyway, I feel as though I feel a soapbox just like sort of like hovering over here.
I just find your work so fascinating, and the way that you incorporate storytelling and drama in the community. It's just, yeah, I've always found what you do fascinating, and I love listening to you talk about it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share
Oh,
your thoughts with
I
us.
thought it was amazing that you would invite me. Thank you so much. It's really nice.
Bye bye, everyone.